Once you've got your behavior defined, we have something we call the 3 dials approach to behavior change. And imagine that you have 3 dials that you can turn up. The first is emotion, how do people feel? The second is calculation, how do they think? And the third is ability, how well are they able to do? And you can think about that as feeling, thinking, and doing, or more poetically, you can think of it as heart, head, and hands.
The next chunk of the template is kind of like a checklist. You're going to take your behavior and run it through each filter, one after the other. First, we're going to start with the heart, changing the behaviors of a small emotionally charged group of people.
It turns out that what we feel is actually more important than what we think. For most behavior, it's the entry point, that it's the door. If you don't get past the emotion door, you don't get to go through the other 2. The activity is first to understand some of the key drivers of emotion. And then the second is to imagine how you can use them. To make sense of our behavior, you really need to think about where we came from and under what conditions our brains evolved. As a species, 99% of our history was spent in small bands in the African savanna. That's when our brains formed. And they didn't change that much as modern society emerged. When you think about that, what jumps out at you is there's sort of 4 big drivers of emotion. The first of those is status. We pay huge attention to status. Much of what we do is an attempt to achieve it. We pay huge attention to people we perceive to have status. We perhaps give them too much authority. We resent it when our status is low relative to others. We arguably care more about status than we do about a lot of material things. So status is the first. The second that jumped out at me was fairness. We are obsessed with it. And you can think of it, if you're in a small interdependent band, you need to get your fair share for yourself and for your offspring. So it's an obsession that makes sense. And we see it in little kids. Some of the first coherent thoughts they express is about mine and about somebody else having something better. And in fact, these experiments you can watch that are hilarious with monkeys, you see that a monkey will reject a reward if they perceive that another monkey got a better reward for the same behavior. And that's just really well established and kind of points to the fact that this is deep, deep in our brains. The third is belonging. If you don't belong to the group, you don't survive. So much of the way we think and feel and our behavior is driven by the need to actually belong in a group. And you see, especially now, you see tribal behavior still critically important in modern society. We're a highly social species. We want more than anything to belong. And the final thing is safety. I don't just mean physical safety, I mean emotional safety, cultural safety, economic safety. We are really loss averse. Losses are really costly. And the pain of a given loss lasts a lot longer than the pleasure of an equivalent gain.
Now, obviously emotions are really complicated and people have lots and lots of them. But the 4, status, fairness, belonging, and safety, are the ones that you want to keep in mind when using the emotion dial for behavior change.
Brainstorm different ways that you could evoke those things, and different ways that jumped out at you that you might evoke, either positive emotions, rarely you want to evoke negative emotions. For example, fairness. I've tried to make it a habit to start asking the question, who loses? Is there anybody in that who would perceive it as threatening, as a loss of their status, or a loss of their stuff, or a loss of their compensation? Who loses? Because if people perceive of something as unfair, that outrage is going to drive everything subsequently, and it's going to undermine any successes you might have. So looking at those 4 drivers and saying, is either one of those in some way going to sink my boat, is a super important screen. Poor people, for some very good reasons, are extremely conservative for the most part. People want to be reassured that there's no risk to a change. They're not going to lose money. It's not like, oh, suddenly the stove's going to be burning up a lot more fuel. Even things like they're not going to get used to it and then it breaks and then they feel bad. These shiny high-performance stoves, this is a very aspirational product that triggers the emotions of hope and optimism. Those are huge drivers. It actually is higher status. So all those emotions attached to increasing one's stature relative to others. They also target whole neighborhoods. So you trigger these emotions around belonging and keeping up with everybody else and going with the herd. Culture is this universal stuff acting on a particular group of people in a particular place over a particular span of time. Culture emerges. I'm more interested in the fundamental drivers of culture and what is universal to us all. I think thinking you understand culture as an outsider is a very dangerous thing. If you really want to relate to that culture, work in tandem with somebody from that culture. And of course there's taboo stuff, and there's some really positive things to tap. But again, the relative value of your knowledge of that culture as an outsider versus your deep knowledge of the fundamental drivers of human behavior, the latter outweighs the former by an order of magnitude. So when you've got a behavior that is dramatically different from what people are already doing, you have to really work hard to evoke strong emotion around that. Generally, we say positive emotion works better than negative emotion, but it's kind of important to know when negative emotion is really effective. And it often is most effective when dramatic, quick action needs to be taken. Moms need to recognize danger signs, and they need to rush that kid to treatment. But in addition, there's going to be positive things that emerge, like the sort of relief and the joy of having your kid taken care of, that enforce that over time. And in fact, a big part of those kind of interventions is to try to make sure people have a really positive experience when they finally reach care, which will drive different emotional responses when the situation comes up again. But initially, you've got to get parents to understand the critical importance of speed.
Okay, Inyanyeri again. Let's look at how their model and how they do stuff directly relates to these emotional drivers. For status, the stoves are an aspirational appliance and actually confer status. For fairness, everyone can get one of these stoves as long as they commit to buying the pellets. For the sense of belonging, with really high saturation because they're free, having an Inyanyeri stove becomes a social norm. And for the safety element, exclusive use protects your family from smoke. If you've done this right, you've got some ideas on how to change that behavior, you may end up with problems and opportunities. Your change could make things feel less safe or more unfair, and there might also be opportunities to make things more fair or more safe.
You have a rich life experience. You've never looked at that life experience through this lens. See where that takes you. I think this stuff is the most fun intellectual stuff there is. And it enriches your own life hugely to be constantly thinking about what drives yourself and others. You kind of feel like you got the inside track.